Dr. Travis Taylor has seen it all. Secret government projects, UFO footage, things most people will never see in their lifetime. But when the results came back from inside this Mesa, he read them 3 times, then went quiet in front of his own team. And what he saw left him speechless. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what happened next is something almost nobody outside this investigation has really understood until now. Skinwalker Ranch, 512 acres, sitting inside Utah's Uinta Basin, a place with a reputation that goes back long before any camera crew ever arrived. Local legend and tribal history describe this land as cursed, watched, wrong somehow. For decades, people who lived near it reported lights in the sky, animals mutilated without explanation, strange sounds at night, equipment that stopped working the moment it got too close to certain parts of the property. Most of that, for most of history, stayed as rumor, campfire stories, the kind of thing you laugh about until you're the one standing there at 2 in the morning. But then serious money and serious science got involved. And that changes everything, because now instead of stories, you get data, instruments, radar, isotope readings. And once you have data, the story stops being something you can just wave away. At the center of that data sits a single landmark on the property, a long, flat-topped ridge of red rock that rises out of the basin like the back of something enormous that's been sleeping there since long before any of us showed up and asked questions. From a distance, it looks like nothing, just another mesa in a landscape full of them. But get close, and especially get underneath it, and the mesa starts doing things that don't add up. Compasses stop behaving. Radio signals scatter and come back broken, or come back after gaps nobody can explain. Drones lose altitude for no clear mechanical reason, and pilots who've flown them for years can't tell you why. The people who've spent years now trying to understand and what's inside this thing have slowly, quietly stopped using the word ordinary when they talk about it. Before we get into the discovery itself, it helps to understand just how skeptical this team is supposed to be by design. This isn't a group of enthusiasts running around with dowsing rods and night vision cameras hoping to catch a ghost on tape. The scientific side of this investigation includes physicists, engineers, and geologists, people whose entire training is built around ruling things out. Their default assumption walking into any anomaly is that there's a mundane explanation: faulty sensor, weather interference, human error, confirmation bias. That is the lens this team uses on every single reading that comes back strange. And it's the same lens Taylor has applied to UFO cases for years, publicly picking apart footage and claims that didn't hold up under scrutiny. That matters because it means when this team says something doesn't have an explanation, they aren't saying it lightly. They're saying it after actively trying and failing to explain it away. Here's where it gets serious. When Dr. Taylor and his team first ran ground-penetrating radar scans across the mesa, they expected what you'd expect: solid rock. Maybe a natural cavity here or there, the kind you'd find in any large rock formation given enough time and erosion. That's not what they found. What the radar showed instead was a void, not a small pocket. A void space roughly 300 feet across and at least 150 feet tall. Picture a chamber that could swallow a football stadium standing on its end, buried inside solid rock. And it wasn't just big, it was precise, geometrically precise, in a way that natural erosion and natural cave formation simply doesn't produce. Nature is messy. Nature doesn't draw straight lines and clean curves 150 feet underground. Something about the shape of this space made the team stop and look at each other. The team ran the scan more than once because a result that big demands more than one look. Different equipment, different paths, different day. The void held its shape every time. No sensor drift, no calibration error, nothing that would explain away a chamber that size, simply vanishing from the data on a second pass the way a false positive usually does. Whatever is down there is not a glitch. It's consistent, it's repeatable, and it's sitting exactly where the first scan said it would be. Every single time the team went back to check it, no exceptions. If that was the only strange piece of evidence, it would already be enough to build a career-defining episode around. But it wasn't the only piece, not even close. The team pulled core samples from the rock surrounding that void, expecting normal geology, layers built up over millions of years the way rock always is. Instead, they found metamorphic changes. That means the rock itself had physically transformed, the way rock does when it's exposed to extreme heat and extreme pressure. We're talking about temperatures that would need to exceed 2,000 degrees Celsius to produce those kinds of changes. For comparison, that is hotter than lava from most volcanic eruptions on Earth. Here's the problem. There is no volcano near this Mesa. There is no known natural heat source in that region capable of producing anything close to that kind of. So something at some point generated enough heat to physically alter a solid rock from the inside in a location with zero geological history that would explain it. Whatever did that, and whenever it happened, it left a signature that modern instruments can still read today. Geologists on the team have pointed out just how narrow the list of natural processes is that could theoretically produce heat at that scale. You're basically looking at deep volcanic activity, a large meteor impact, or some kind of massive underground combustion event. Every one of those processes leaves behind its own distinct fingerprint in the surrounding rock and soil. Patterns geologists know how to read the way a doctor reads an X-ray. According to the team's own analysis, none of those fingerprints match what they found at the Mesa. No volcanic ash layers, no impact fractures radiating outward the way you'd expect from a meteor strike, no burn residue consistent with any fuel source anyone can identify. The heat happened. The evidence of what caused it simply isn't there, at least not in any form current geology knows how to recognize. Now, if you've made it this far, you already know this channel isn't about wild guesses and jump scares set to dramatic music. We look at what the evidence actually says, and we let you decide what you think it means. So if that's the kind of channel you want to keep watching, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because this story is nowhere near finished, and there's more coming that connects directly to what you just heard, because the void and the heat signature were only the beginning. As the team kept working, they picked up something else: gamma radiation. Not massive, not the kind of reading that would set off alarms in a nuclear facility, but stronger and stranger than ordinary background geology should produce in that location. The natural explanation is still technically on the table. Certain rock formations can carry naturally occurring radioactive minerals. That explanation is sitting there. It's just sitting there a little uncomfortably, because by every account, the readings coming off this site are more consistent and more elevated than a simple natural deposit would typically produce. What made the readings harder to dismiss was the pattern behind them. A natural mineral deposit tends to sit still. You map it once, and the numbers stay roughly the same no matter when you go back and check. That is not what the team found here. The gamma levels near the Mesa shifted over time, rising and falling in a way that a passive rock deposit simply shouldn't do on its own. That kind of fluctuation is usually the signature of something active, not something sitting quietly in the ground doing nothing. That leaves less comfortable possibilities on the table too. Something inside the Mesa actively producing radiation rather than simply containing it. Something behaving more like a source than a deposit, to use the phrase investigators on this project have leaned toward. Nobody on the team has stood in front of a camera and said the word artificial outright. They haven't had to. When you lay the readings next to each other, the data says it quietly on its own, and anyone paying attention can hear it. Then there's the radio interference, and this is the part that reportedly unsettled even the more skeptical members of the team. During a drilling operation near the Mesa, the crew had a spectrum analyzer running, a device built to listen to the invisible layer of electromagnetic noise that surrounds all of us all the time, most of which is just background clutter from cell towers, Wi-Fi, and ordinary electronics. What that device picked up near the drill site did not look like ordinary clutter. Structured signal behavior appearing and disappearing in ways tied to what the drill was doing underground, as if something below was responding to the disturbance. Put yourself in that room for a second. You're one of the most credentialed physicists in the country. You've spent your career trained to find the boring explanation first, because the boring explanation is almost always the right one. That's not pessimism. That's just good science. But you're staring at a void that shouldn't exist, rock that's been through heat with no source, radiation behaving like an active signal instead of a deposit, and now electromagnetic activity that seems to respond to what you're physically doing to the ground. At some point, the boring explanations run out one by one, and you're left holding a stack of data with nowhere comfortable to put it. That is reportedly the moment that got to Dr. Taylor. Not one dramatic flash of light, not one screaming headline. It was the slow, grinding accumulation of evidence that a man who has spent decades finding equipment errors, bad data, and wishful thinking in other people's work finally looked at his own team's findings and couldn't find the error. Every normal explanation had been checked. Every normal explanation had come up short. And when you take away every safe, boring answer, what you're left holding is the uncomfortable kind of question that doesn't go away just because you turn off the camera. By multiple accounts, that's close to what happened as Taylor worked through the accumulated data with his team. Every normal explanation got tested. Every normal explanation came up short. He looked over the results, looked up at his colleagues, opened his mouth, and chose, very carefully, not to say the first thing that came to mind. If you've ever worked with someone who is usually the most confident voice in the room, you know exactly how loud that kind of silence can be. It's worth pausing here to talk about what makes this investigation different from a lot of the other paranormal or UFO content floating around online. Most of that content relies on grainy footage, anonymous witnesses, or claims that can never actually be checked. This investigation is the opposite of that. Every reading gets logged. Every instrument gets calibrated and recalibrated. Outside experts get brought in to review the data independently, specifically so the team can't be accused of only seeing what they want to see. When a result looks strange, the first move isn't to get excited, it's to try to break it. Rerun the scan, swap the equipment, bring in a second team with different gear to see if they get the same numbers. Time after time, according to the investigation's own record, the strange results survive that process. They don't fall apart under scrutiny. They hold up, which is exactly the kind of consistency that turns a curiosity into something a serious scientist has to take seriously. This is the part where most videos on this topic would just throw out wild theories and call it a day. We're not going to do that to you. What we can tell you is this: the most rigorous, most disciplined response the investigation has landed on after years of data is not a dramatic declaration of alien contact, and it's not a dismissal either. It's something closer to a sober, careful admission. We do not yet know what we are looking at. And the more carefully the team looks, the more certain they become that it is, in fact, something. Not nothing, not noise, something. Think about how rare that statement actually is coming from someone with Taylor's background. Scientists with his level of training don't say, "We don't know," for attention. Saying, "I don't know," on camera with your name and your reputation attached is one of the hardest things a credentialed expert can do, because it opens the door for every critic out there to pile on. The fact that he said it anyway, more than once, after years of pushing back on his own findings, tells you something about how strong the data actually is. If you're the kind of person who likes connecting dots instead of just being told what to think, drop a comment below with what you think is really inside that Mesa. Natural phenomena we don't understand yet. Old military testing nobody's declassified, something else entirely. I read these, and some of the best theories in this comment section end up shaping what we dig into next. Now, let's talk about why this specific discovery matters beyond just one mesa on one ranch in Utah. Because here's the uncomfortable follow-up question nobody likes to sit with. If this formation exists here, hidden for who knows how long until modern radar technology was pointed at exactly the right spot, how many other locations on Earth might be hiding something similar? We don't have satellite coverage detailed enough to scan every mesa, every mountain, every unexplained geological anomaly on the planet with ground-penetrating radar. This discovery wasn't found because someone was looking everywhere. It was found because a team happened to be looking in one specific place for entirely different reasons and stumbled into something they weren't expecting. That's not comforting. That's the kind of detail that should make you sit up a little straighter. The investigation itself has stretched across multiple years and multiple seasons of documented work, not a single dramatic afternoon. That matters because it's easy to dismiss a single strange reading as equipment error or coincidence. It's much harder to dismiss a pattern that holds up across years of testing, multiple instruments, multiple independent scientists, and multiple confirmations. This isn't one guy with one weird gadget making a bold claim on the internet. This is a structured, funded, long-term investigation involving a chief scientist for an actual federal task force using the same categories of equipment used in legitimate geological and physics research anywhere else in the world. And the Mesa isn't the only anomaly on this property, which is honestly part of what makes this story so hard to file away neatly. There have been other structured mysteries documented on this same land, some involving strange invisible boundaries that instruments behave differently near, some involving unexplained bursts of unusual frequencies picked up far from any drilling activity at all. None of these pieces exist in isolation. They sit next to each other in the investigation's growing record, each one adding weight to the idea that something coordinated, something with an underlying structure, is happening across this land, not just under one section of rock. Quick pause here. If this is the kind of deep dive you actually want more of, tap that like button now. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who'd want to see it too. Okay, back to the Mesa. And it's worth remembering that long before any scientist ever set foot on this property with a radar unit or a gamma detector, the people who lived closest to this land already had their own explanation for why it behaved the way it did. Indigenous oral history in the region describes this ground as a crossing point, a place where boundaries between worlds run thin, watched over by something that has never fully welcomed outsiders. For generations, that history got treated the way most oral tradition gets treated by outsiders, as folklore, as color commentary for a strange patch of desert. Nobody was cross-referencing it against ground-penetrating radar data because nobody had that data yet. But now that the modern instruments are turning up a void with no natural cause, heat with no natural source, and radiation acting like a signal instead of a deposit, it's hard not to notice how much of the old description of this land as unnatural, as occupied by something, lines up uncomfortably well with what the science is now independently finding on its own. Two completely different ways of investigating the same patch of ground, centuries apart, arriving in the same uneasy neighborhood. That overlap alone doesn't prove anything by itself, and a careful scientist like Taylor would be the first to tell you that. Correlation isn't causation, and old stories aren't data. But when a modern, instrument-driven investigation keeps independently rediscovering the same shape of mystery that local tradition described long before radar existed, it's the kind of coincidence that at least earns your attention, even if it doesn't hand you a conclusion. Here's something else worth sitting with. Taylor's entire professional identity, his entire career, has been built on the idea that the universe eventually yields to careful measurement. That if you ask the right questions with the right instruments and you're patient and rigorous enough, you get an answer. That belief is what took him from a physics doctorate to NASA, to classified defense work, to the Pentagon's own UAP investigation. It's the belief system of someone who does not want to believe in things that can't be measured. And after years standing at the edge of this 512-acre property, that same belief system has, by his own account, given him more reason than ever to take what's happening here with complete seriousness. Not because he wants a dramatic answer, because the measurements keep refusing to give him a boring one. Every angle his team has tried, every alternative explanation they've chased down, every piece of equipment they've swapped out to rule out error has led back to the same uncomfortable place. And for a man whose entire career was built on trusting the instruments over the imagination, that pattern is exactly what makes this so hard for him to simply walk away from. If you've stuck with the story this far, you clearly want more than just headlines and jump cuts. So make sure you're subscribed and you've got notifications turned on, because we're going to keep tracking this investigation as new data comes in. And there's more from inside this Mesa that hasn't been fully unpacked yet. Let's bring it back to that moment we opened with. A man with degrees in electrical engineering and physics, 2 decades inside classified defense programs, chief scientist for the Pentagon's own task force, built specifically to investigate anomalous phenomena. Someone who has spent his entire career being the person in the room who finds the flaw in everyone else's wild claim. That is who stood at the edge of this Mesa, and after everything the instruments told him, could not hand you a clean, boring answer. Not a hoax, not an equipment glitch, not wishful thinking. A void with no natural explanation. Rock altered by heat with no natural source. Radiation behaving less like a deposit and more like signal. Electromagnetic activity that seemed to answer back when the ground was disturbed. Stack all of that up, and you get a scientist choosing his words very, very carefully, because for once, none of the easy answers were left standing. So here's the real question, and it's the one worth sitting with long after this video ends. If one of the most qualified scientists in the country, someone trusted by NASA, the Army, and the Pentagon itself, can stand in front of this evidence and honestly say he doesn't have an explanation, What does that tell you about how much we actually understand about the ground beneath our feet? There's a broader pattern worth thinking about here too. Throughout history, plenty of things that eventually became accepted science started out exactly like this. A group of trained observers keeps running into something that doesn't fit the existing model. They document it carefully. They get dismissed or mocked by people who never looked at the data themselves. And it takes years, sometimes decades, before the rest of the scientific community catches up. That doesn't mean everything unexplained turns out to be revolutionary. Most of the time, mysteries do eventually get boring, ordinary explanations once enough data comes in. But it does mean that dismissing something purely because it sounds strange, without actually engaging with the instruments and the numbers behind it, has a pretty bad track record throughout the history of science. That's really the position this investigation sits in right now. Not proven, not disproven. Actively, seriously unresolved, sitting on a stack of hard data that keeps refusing to resolve itself into anything comfortable. And the team isn't walking away from it. Every new season of investigation adds more instrumentation, more cross-checking, more independent experts brought in specifically to try to poke holes in what's already been found. So far, according to everything reported, the holes haven't shown up. The anomaly keeps holding. Think about what it would actually take for you personally to say, I don't know about something in your own area of expertise, the thing you've spent your entire career being confident about. Now, imagine saying that on camera, with your name attached, knowing critics are waiting to jump on it. That's the position Taylor has repeatedly put himself in over and over across years of this investigation, because the data kept forcing his hand. That's not the behavior of someone chasing a viral moment. That's the behavior of someone who would clearly rather have a boring answer and simply hasn't been given one. We don't have a neat bow to tie on this. And honestly, that's the point. The investigation is still going. The Mesa is still there. And whatever is inside it hasn't given up its full story yet. If this kept you hooked until the very end, that tells me you want more of these deep dives, not just recycled headlines. So hit that subscribe button, leave a comment with your honest theory, and share this with someone who needs to hear what's actually been found underneath at Mesa. We'll back with the next piece of this investigation soon, and trust me, it goes even deeper than what you just watched. Before you go, think back to everything laid out here. A hollow chamber the size of a stadium, sitting under solid rock with a shape too clean to be natural. Rock scorched by heat with no volcano, no impact, and no fuel source anywhere nearby to explain it. Radiation readings that keep behaving less like a passive mineral deposit and more like something actively producing a signal. Electromagnetic activity that appeared to shift in response to physical drilling happening above it. And standing in the middle of all of it, a scientist with the kind of resume that usually ends arguments, not starts them, unable to close the case. None of that is speculation dressed up as fact. That's the plain documented shape of what years of instrumentation on this property has turned up. What it means is still an open question, and honestly, it might stay an open question for a long time yet. But an open question backed by this much consistent, independently verified data is a very different thing from a rumor, and it deserves to be treated that way. So it takes a second before you close this video. Ask yourself what you actually think is down there, not what makes the best headline, not what sounds coolest to say out loud, but what you genuinely think the evidence is pointing toward. Drop that answer in the comments. This community has some of the sharpest, most detail-oriented viewers on this entire topic, and Honestly, some of the best leads for future videos have come directly from comments left right here. Thanks for watching all the way through. We'll see you in the next one when we go even further into what this Mesa has been hiding. Because based on what's already lacked out about the next round of testing, this story is nowhere close to over, and you will genuinely not want to miss where this goes from here.